You are listening to the After the Timeout podcast, hosted by Todd Zazadil and Jon Pilecki, two high school head coaches looking to help others spread their passion for the game of basketball. Tune in for episodes about anything basketball related, on the court, off the court, and anything in between. We at the After the Timeout podcast would like to take a full time out to talk about VREPS basketball. Coaches, do you get frustrated by how some players just cannot seem to learn your offensive system? Are you spending countless hours teaching your offensive system to your team just for them to forget by the next practice? You should check out VREPS. VREPS was founded by basketball players and coaches to create tools that make learning plays easily a reality. VREPS allows coaches to turn their 2D playbook into a 3D interactive video game that players can watch on any mobile device on their own time. Don't just have players watch film, have them live it and control the players so that they have a better, more efficient learning experience. It's free to try. Go to vreps.us to sign up today. All right, so on today's episode, we're joined by Lason Perkins, founder of the Virtual Coaches Clinic. I could go on with all the different things Coach Perkins is famous for, but we'll leave it at that for right now. So, Coach, how you doing? Good morning.
Good morning, guys. Doing well. Thank you for asking me to be a part of this.
So let's get right into, the Summit Coaches Clinics. I was watching a replay of one last night, actually. I checked in live with the assistant from Appalachian State, I think the night before. So kind of just take our listeners through, how you kind of started it, how's it kind of changed the game, and just the benefits of these coaches clinics through the COVID period.
Well, it really started, and I have to give John Carrier, a high school coach from Minnesota, I really got to give him credit because, he had been doing some of these Google meetups with coaches and kind of exchanging ideas and concepts and stuff. And so, he had invited me to be a part of it, and I never had the time to do it. So, once COVID hit, I remember I put a tweet out that said, hey, does anybody want to get together and talk, talk basketball and, talk about some ideas. And I had around 40, 50 people respond. Yes, I'd love to do it. And I'm like, well, I just don't have a big enough Zoom room, or the capacity to do something, with that. So I've been doing some work with a company called CoachTube, which does instructional videos for coaches of all sports. And so I talked to Wade Floyd, who was the owner of CoachTube, and I knew he had a Zoom room. I'm like, hey, Wade, could I borrow your Zoom room and do these? I want to get together with these coaches and kind of talk about stuff. And he was like, well, you think we could maybe scale it and do something bigger with it? I'm like, I don't see why not. I mean, I think a lot of coaches would be interested in doing it. And so he's like, well, he said, let me talk to one other person. So then Wade brought in Lee Klein, who is the former CEO of Five Star. And Lee had been wanting to do a project with Wade for years. And so we all three got together, started talking, and I'm like, well, here are the coaches I could bring, or I could ask to speak. Lee's like, well, I've got all of my coaches and, that I know that I could speak. And so, we started on a Sunday afternoon contacting coaches, and within an hour, we had 20 coaches, commit to speaking. And, we were literally doing this by, we were kind of building the airplane as we were flying it, so to speak. So once we set the site up, we didn't really have a goal, or we didn't have an end in mind. So, when the first 5,000 coaches signed up, I'm like, hey, that's pretty good. That's not bad. Then the next day it's at 10,000, and it just started growing and growing. So an incredible event that allowed people to connect and not only share ideas and share knowledge, but really a chance for people to really, interact with each other, make new relationships, because obviously, we couldn't get out. We couldn't go to clinics. We couldn't go and watch workouts and do watch practices and do the things that we've always done in the past. So I think it almost created a new paradigm that this could be done. And it allowed us also to access coaches, from international and from overseas who have great ideas, who have great concepts that, the only way you could, get to know them or talk to them was to go to that country, and actually physically visit them in person. The clinics just open up this whole new way of learning and this whole new, like I said, whole new paradigm that I think that, even with the in-person clinics coming back, there will still be a place for it.
So that was going to be actually my follow-up. You kind of led right into it is, first of all, Todd and I also really enjoy the Jon Carrier chats. We've been on those ourselves. But just going forward, with the success of the virtual clinics through COVID, we're all trying to analyze, after COVID, what'll stay and what'll go. Do you think it will decrease attendance at in-person clinics just because of the ease of the virtual?
No, I don't think it will, because I actually spoke at an in-person clinic about 2 weeks ago, and the first thing I said was, I love the fact that we're actually in person. That I think there's a Zoom burnout. I think it's very legitimate to say that people are ready to actually get back and hang out with their coaching colleagues and with their friends, and and talk basketball and hang out and do things like that. So I think there'll be a variation of it where there will still be a place for the general clinic, but I think there's also now a move to do more in depth, like the 5-out clinic that we just did with Chris Oliver, where we focus on a specific subject rather than have a broad area of clinics. I think that's the trend where people are going, because again, you have that level of coach that enjoys the general clinics, but you also have those coaches like, hey, I really want to get better at, let's say, the Princeton. So who is somebody that I can study, or who has some information that I can go more in depth on that particular topic.
So the next kind of thing I want to talk about, you talked about connecting, right? Now, I personally, I think one of the things I learned is like, you never would think you could talk to or get in touch with some of these coaches, right? Because, I'm a high school coach, and, Gino Ariema or wherever is at UConn, but, he's right there and accessible. One, I want to kind of pick your brain on the networking aspect of it, just in general, not necessarily the clinics, but the networking and the kind of the process of finding coaching jobs and the hiring process, not only for college guys, but for high school guys especially, and how coaches can go about that, whether it be connecting with people through Zoom or in person.
That's a great question, because it's something that I've really struggled and focused on for years, because I didn't want to be that person that always contacts someone when I'm looking for a job. I wanted to make sure that I gave value, and I give credit to Kevin Eastman, for this, about giving as much value as I can when I contact someone. And I think we all have kind of like our dream list. Yeah, I'd love to be able to talk to Gino Ariema, or I'd love to be able to talk to Greg Popovich. And so there's going directly to that person and establishing a contact and trying to build a relationship. Then there's always just going and getting to know their assistants, or getting to know people on their staff, with the intention of bringing value, of giving of helping them in the process. Because one of the biggest lessons that I learned from this clinic is that, if you help other people, if you, give them value, they're going to want to give value in return. There's a reciprocal, part of it. And so a lot of speakers that we got for the event was because we knew somebody, and we just asked, hey, would you talk, would you mind, connecting us with this particular coach? For example, there was a coach from Europe, Andrea Trinchieri, an Italian coach who coaches professionally. He's a coach that I've always wanted to talk to. And so because of my relationship with a group in the Czech Republic, I was able to get his phone number. And so, I reached out to him, and he was like, yeah, as soon as my schedule clears up, I'll speak. And he did end up speaking in May. But, I would say, almost, it has to be a daily, I think it has to be a daily part of your activities, where you're sending an email, and maybe it's just an article that you saw that you thought that coach might have, or I'm a reader, I love to read, so I'll send book notes or quotes, from something that I just read that I just thought might be relevant to any coach. Continue to could do that to build that relationship so that when it is time for the ask, it doesn't seem as awkward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely think it makes sense. And I think in this profession, Todd and I have found through our podcast, we never thought certain people would want to talk to us, and we reach out to them and like, yeah, we'll come on. But something we wanted to transition, with you or coaches that have coached a long time, what are for a young coach? We're going to do a couple questions about young coaches coming up, but just for a young coach, what are some lessons you've learned from your experiences and some keys to longevity within the profession? We see so many coaches burn out so quickly. So what are some keys or lessons learned that you would share with a young coach?
And one of the biggest lessons is you cannot attach your self-esteem to your won and loss record. That at the end of the day, it doesn't. That's not what you're going to be remembered for. That you're going to be remembered how you treated people and how the type of emotions that you created in others. That's what players are going to remember the most. I think that was my biggest mistake early on, was I was so outcome driven versus focusing more on the process and focusing on relationships. And it's still a struggle because I think anytime you walk into a new situation, into a new program, you have a vision, you have an intention that you want to build, and in that process you have to balance it along with really getting to know your players. And it's especially harder when you're an off-campus coach. Now, I know some coaches are fortunate enough that they work there at the school. There's a lot of coaches that I know that are, that work from home, work another job, then they come up to the school. And that's a challenge. That's just really hard. And, that's been my situation, or that was my situation my last 4 years of coaching. And so I think you've got to be really intentional about the relationship part, with spending time with your players and doing things to get to know them. And almost think in a way, and this is something from Brendan Serb, was, getting permission to coach, a player. I don't think you could just assume this player wants to be coached. It's almost like, hey, can I coach you? Can I get permission here now to share with you some things? And that way it establishes that I'm coming from a place of caring and wanting you to get better, versus, hey, I'm just trying to show off my knowledge, or I'm just trying to get you to do something that maybe you don't want to do because you just don't see the value in it, or you don't see how, this is affecting the team. I'd say that would be the two biggest things. I think the third thing, which is being humble, being willing to learn and not going into a situation thinking you have all the answers. I think if anything, you need to have more questions than answers, and constantly question not just why things were done a certain way, but how, obviously how you can do things better, or is there another method that might work? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to change your offensive system or you've got to put a new play in. Maybe it's just, the way you watch film. Maybe it's just, something that you do on game day, but having that willingness to question everything that you do, on a day-to-day basis, and willing to change it, and not worry about what other people are going to think.
So I wanted to follow up. You talked about relationships. I personally took over a program in the middle of a pandemic, right? So it's very hard to, make those. It's harder to make those connections over Zoom, right? And things like that. So I guess over this time, what did we learn that we can? What do you think we coaches have learned that we can use relationships wise with some of the technology we've used? And also maybe what did we learn that is more important and kind of trumps everything, being in person as far as relationships?
I would say that I think a lot of coaches have learned, and I even learned before we had to resort to Zoom, that, a lot of players and a lot of, kids, obviously prefer to communicate through text. And so a lot of the conversations that they don't feel comfortable with one-on-one or in person with a coach, is better done through text, and just kind of establishing that back and forth with them. And then I think through Zoom, there's almost it's almost a comfort level there. And I even experienced that when I was working with a company that did e-learning that was doing like tutoring via, via Zoom or via, digital, versus in person. And they were even saying at that point, a lot of these students kind of drop their defenses and drop their guards because there's no physical proximity and, they feel a little bit more comfortable. But I really think, kind of going back to an old saying that I remember from sales, was that intent counts more than technique. If you're coming in with the intention that, look, I want to, build this relationship, I want to help you, I want to see you grow in all areas, not just as a basketball player, and you have the intention. Are you going to screw up? Yeah, I don't know I don't know necessarily every, singer that got, people are listening to right now, or, I don't know maybe the latest lingo, but if I'm putting the effort in, and showing that I care and, and I'm trying, I think at some point, hopefully they pick up on that. And, and if not, I'll just keep on trying, because again, it's not, at the end of the day, it's, it's more about planting the seeds that, as Kevin Sutton talks about, we're trying to build living trophies. We may not see the results immediately. We may not see the changes or the effects of what we do for years. And I'll give you a great example. I remember when I was working at Chapel Hill High School, there was a young man in our classroom, and he came from a troubled home. He had a lot of issues going on. And, a lot of people, I think, had given up on it in a sense, just because of what he was doing in that moment. So let's fast forward a couple of years later. I'm taking my son to this, these businesses that do music lessons, like School of Rock. So it's a School of Rock franchise here. I walk in the door, and there's that kid. And I knew he loved music, and we connected on music, just talking about different bands and things at the time. But he's now an instructor, working at the school. So I went to the guy who owned him, like, hey, how's he doing? He's like, he's doing great. He's cleaned up his life. He's talking about how he wants to really make some changes. And so you just never know what the relationship, what you do now, how it's going to affect and help someone else down the road. So I think that's something to always keep in mind.
Most definitely. I think that gets lost a lot in people. Everybody talks about relationships and culture and all that, but I think that's kind of the base of it, just connecting with your kids and trying to find a way to make it work. So I want to transition out to a little bit of X's and O's system. What kind of going back again when you first started coaching, because obviously, we all know you've seen so many things, and you've put stuff out there, and you've researched and studied. But when you first started coaching, right, being the young coach, right, everybody's naive. What did you run? And then, what kind of things did you keep as you went on? And then what kind of did you get rid of, and, the process for that?
So when I first started coaching at Cary High School in the mid-90s, and I was an assistant, we ran the numbered fast break, which is something I've kept probably up until the last 2 or 3 years when I've moved more to the two-sided break. But I really like numbered break because it allowed me to basically pinpoint, okay, who was supposed to fill which lane. And we had also built our press attack into it as well. But we ran that into the Tom Davis modified flex. And so, there was actually 2 assistant coaches on the staff at the time. There was one coach, Alan Gustafson, who ended up, eventually being the head coach at Cary High for a number of years, and I worked for him as a JV coach. He was kind of in charge in that. But our head coach, Bill Boyette, allowed me to put in some sets. So, we had, I think I put in a horn set for us at that time. We had a couple of post-up plays, which one that I continue to use. And in fact, even my assistant coaches who now coach, used it as well. But so I kind of kept that. And then as I, eventually as I became, I guess, had a little bit more freedom, I liked the modified flex, but I also wanted something with a little bit more motion and a little bit better spacing. That's when I started to move to open post, which, was the first video that I did. I loved watching Huggins teams at Cincinnati, back in the 90s, and the way they just moved the ball and the way they could just, create cutting action. And I just thought it was a good fit for us. Of course, that changed, once I started watching the Europeans and, the European game, and, was picking up more sets from them. But then once I discovered Euro ball screen, it was kind of like, okay, we're going to run Euro ball screen, but then we're going to also have 5 out kind of as our backup offense. It's kind of like a secondary that we can go to if things just break down. Hey, let's just get in 5 spots, pass and cut, and go from there.
So this is a debate I've been going back and forth with. Obviously, I run a 5-out offense myself, and I always for years did the 4-out, 1 in with the rim runner, but I realized it didn't fit our half court offense. The flow was always kind of janky because my post player would be like, okay, well I ran to the rim. Well, where do you want me to go? How long do you want me to wait, etc. What was your kind of take us through like your transition period from kind of that older, rim runner 4-out to the 5-out. And last year was the first year I kind of did the 2-sided fast break. Kind of take us through, how you transitioned and then what you feel the benefits of the 2-sided are in comparison to the old, more 4-out with the rim runner.
I think the biggest change was just that, again, as you saw the big emphasis on spacing, that it really didn't make sense to me to have someone run to the rim every time, unless there was an advantage. I could see if, on a missed break situation, if we get ahead, and maybe you've got an advantage in that situation, and, because now we talk about creating advantage and maintain, building that advantage. But then I thought Cody Toppert said it best a couple of weeks ago when he did the 5-out clinic. He's like, it makes no sense that we're asking, our biggest player, usually our biggest player, sometimes one of our slowest players, to run from basically free throw line to free throw line, and then go, get there every single time. It just makes no sense. Why not just stop him at the top and just play from there? And, as soon as he said, I'm like, it just kind of clicked. I'm like, that's it. That's the explanation. I kind of need it right there because I think another thing was just that, sometimes we got stuck with the idea of it had to be our biggest player, it had to be our post player. I remember at both Cary High School when I coached there and we did it at Cary Academy, is that we had our fastest player, run to the rim. And again, it was just, if he could get ahead, we threw it ahead, just because he was outrunning everybody. But yeah, no, I've shifted now just because, again, I think the 5-out spacing just allows so much more freedom. It allows you to still post, still do the things that you want to do. But I just think it takes a lot of pressure off that one player of having to continually get down the floor, and often how many times would you have a post player, like you said, would run a couple times, never get the ball? What are they going to do naturally? They're going to stop running. So now it's almost like we're going to take the pressure off of you, just have you run to half court or run to the top of the key. And now you can be more of a facilitator versus, oh, I'm just, I'm putting all this effort in and doing nothing.
I went through the exact same thought process, so I'm glad I'm not the only one. So, Todd and I always like to talk to coaches about, the process of finding the right system for you. We've talked to Mike Neighbors and, he had some really interesting thoughts about it. Lynn Dunn had some really interesting thoughts about it. But, what do you think is that process? Do you start with the players and adapt your system to them? Do you fit your players to the system? I think that's the age-old question for any coach. What are your thoughts about that question?
I really think it comes down to the players because, especially at the high school level, you're going to have different talent levels. You're going to have different capabilities with your players. And rather than trying to fit them into a system, I think you can still have a system, but the system has to have some flexibility to it. And you have to have ways to be able to create and get that player, open and get them shots. So, going back to my earlier discussion about when we were running, numbered break and we were running, the modified flex. Well, I had a really good guard that could get downhill. And so we're like, okay, we need to set ball screens. We need to get him, within a position where he can come off a ball screen and attack downhill, and get to the rim because he's also a very good passer. So defense collapses, he's going to find open players. Same thing when I was at Chapel Hill High School. I'm working for 2 coaches who played in the Carolina system. And so, of course, they were all about, let's run, we're going to run secondary break, things of that nature. And, one day I'm like, hey, guys, I'm like, I agree. I think secondary break is got some merits to it. But I'm like, we don't necessarily have the post players that Coach Smith and Coach Williams have. So, we've got some really good guards. So why don't we set some drag screens, or some double drags, and let's get them, in an open court and open them up and let them get to the rim. So I think that, to me, it starts with the players. And I think it has to be a mix of different things. I don't think you could just carbon copy one system. Like, I can't take Mike Neighbors. I could take parts of Mike Neighbors' offense. I could take parts of what maybe Coach Dunn has done. I could take parts from this coach and kind of make it my own. Because I think the tendency, the danger is that a coach will watch a play on TV and like, oh, that's a great play. That's a great thing. I'm going to put it in. The next day they put it in, they're frustrated at the kids because they're not seeing the same results. Because again, we're talking about, especially when we're talking about NBA players, we're talking about a whole different level, of talent. And so I really think you have to temper it with, okay, what fits this skill level? What fits these players? Like, if I'm coaching, if I'm coaching a youth team, like if I'm coaching like a group of, eighth and, seventh and eighth graders, I'm probably running more 5 out. I'm teaching them how to space. I'm teaching pass and cut, maybe teaching some basic screening actions. Probably not teaching ball screens. Maybe I'm teaching more gets where, I pass the ball and I go get it back from the player, and just, kind of start teaching the principles of ball screens from that. But trying to carbon copy a playbook from, a college coach or, a pro team, it doesn't work. I just don't think it works. But I think you can pick from it. You can pick parts from it and say, okay, maybe I'll just take this one little part right here and add it in and see how it works.
So we'd be remiss if we didn't talk to you about the continuity ball screen, right? I've heard your story a couple of times on different podcasts of how you found it, but we want to go in a different direction here a little bit and dive into some of the other stuff. So, most people have a pretty good idea, or have seen it, but what are some of the counters within that continuity ball screen, right? Because you're doing the same kind of pattern. A lot of coaches figured, okay, we're going to do this to it. So what are some of the counters within that continuity ball screen offense?
I think one of the biggest, and this is something that I did recently talk about at the clinic, is that making it more motion-like versus more pattern and robotic. And I think the way you do that is that you give the post player, when you set the ball screen, and that player either rolls or pops. I mean, I don't think you have to roll them every single time. If they could shoot it, I think you can pop them. But what I think you do now is you give them freedom to either fill back up to the top or stay low. Because I think that opens up a lot. Just imagine, you come off the ball screen, you reverse it, that post player rolled and now stays low instead of coming back up. You get the action on the second side. Now they've got a bigger gap to fill into or to drive into versus having that post player right there with with a player at the nail possibly, helping that situation. I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is that you also give that first cutter options. And so maybe, that cutter doesn't necessarily cut to the corner, every time. You may have them come and get the ball, which I call a snap action. So now as soon as we reverse it to the post, instead of cutting to the corner, he's just coming right behind and getting the ball from that player and either driving it, either side, and you play off that. Or you could have them, start to cut. Instead of filling opposite corner, now they fill same side corner. So now you've got a ball, you've got a handoff or a ball screen on the side with a roll and replace action. So I think that's one way. That's one way to get it into more of a motion like. I think another thing is that teams have the tendency to only reverse the ball through the high post, and so most coaches are just going to deny that high post and completely take that away to disrupt it. Other than trapping, I think the two best ways to disrupt that offense is to trap it, or just completely take away the high post with a denial and then make them do something else. So you have to have the ability to reverse it either to the wing or to the corner on the 3 side, and then from there have some actions that you run. There's a school up in Minnesota, coached by the name of Dave Kress, does a great job with the offense, and he and I have talked for years about different ideas. What they do is anytime it hits the wing or the corner on the opposite side and they don't shoot, they basically go into basically a 3-man action there where, let's say if you hit the wing doesn't have a shot, maybe it doesn't have a one more to the corner. That wing now dribbles to to the corner for a dribble handoff, and now the post player follows into a ball screen. And so they just play off that, and then you get the roll and replace action there. If they throw it to the corner, now the wing, if the corner doesn't have a shot, and if you don't have a one more to the wing, that wing goes and sets the ball screen, and now the corner player comes down, and you get basically a double screen there. I think that's some of the best counters or the best options to have within the offense, other than specific actions for your players. Like, one of the tendencies is that the post players, you're not running things, the post players are not necessarily getting touches in the offense unless you've got guards that are unselfish and would hit them, on the open, when they're open. So I think you have to run, little specials for them, either the rip screen, little back screen for them and roll them into the rim, or maybe, you reverse it, you get into a cross screen action and get the post the ball. So I think you've got to get them touches as well, in order to make the offense effective.
So you mentioned a little bit, but let's talk about defending it, right? What gives it a lot of trouble? What kind of, I guess, schemes, systems, attributes of different athletes, right? Different players gives the ball screen continuity trouble?
I would say the first one would be the trap, would be just trapping the ball screen, because at that point, can you get back into the continuity? A lot of teams, I think, if all they work on is the continuity portion, it's almost like disrupting the flex. So what do you do, if you've disrupted the flex? What are you going to run to next? And so I think you have to have the ability, if you trap, to get the ball out and score. It can't be let's just break the trap and get back into continuity. No, you got to get the ball to the middle, and get and attack get the 2-on-1 on the backside and get layups off of it. I'd say that would be the first way. I think the second one is, a lot of teams will now ice it, and try to not let them use the screen and force it down, into the baseline area. Again, I think that's it, especially if you've got a bigger post that, is more of a shot blocker and has kind of a rim presence that can protect. I think that would be a good strategy there. And then going back to what I said, a second ago with the denial, I think just taking away that reversal pass, especially if you've scouted that team and you see that's all they're doing is looking to reverse to the high post, then yeah, completely take that away. Because again, if you've got a shot clock, you're not getting back into continuity at that point. If you have no shot clock, well then yeah, I can just reset it and get back into spots and play it again. But if I can do enough to disrupt it and throw you off your pattern, then I think that if you don't practice that and work against it, then that's going to create some confusion, and that's going to completely take away, I think, your tempo and your way to attack.
So we kind of just started talking defensively, specifically to the continuity ball screen, but I think so much of offense is rhythm and flow. And so for you, what defensive things are very disruptive to offenses? Is it switching defenses? Is it a specific kind of defense? Is it a way to defend? Is it pressure defense? What do you feel is the most disruptive to any just different offensive flow?
I think it always starts with pressure on the ball. I think if you've got good pressure on the basketball and you're making it very hard for that ball handler to get into, either get the ball down the floor or get the ball entered to start the play, I think that's where it starts. And we can debate on denying passing lanes, versus playing pack, switching. I think to me, everything still starts with, do you have good pressure on the ball? And then from there, it comes down to what are you most comfortable teaching and what are your players most comfortable, playing. Because I've done both. I mean, we've played pressure, we've played pressure man to man where we're on the line, up the line, taking away passes. I've also played pack. We've switched everything. We've guarded the ball screen 2 or 3 different ways. I think it all also comes down to your confidence level as a coach saying, hey, this is what works. This is how we're going to, this is what is going to work to cause and disrupt this team. But I'm not avoiding the question. I'm kind of going around it because, again, there's different ways everybody has a different methodology.
Yep.
I know, and I can tell you from my last experience coaching at the school I was at, because we had so many players that were playing multiple sports. I had to spend more time working on individual development and player development and practice. So I just went to switch. I just said, look, we're going to switch everything. And now we're going to focus on making sure that A, we defend the ball, well, and keep the ball in front of us. And then B, we're going to rebound. Once the shot goes up, we're going to go get that basketball, and then convert to the other end. But yeah, to answer your question, I'd almost have to say it would be something of more of a pressure where you're forcing people wider, or you're really forcing them wider to on a catch, which almost now fits into the 5-out spacing where people are playing that 4-point spacing. But it's almost to the point of, okay, the only thing I'm gonna allow you really to do is the back cut, because unless you're running like a Princeton system, you've got to hit those backdoor cuts consistently in order for somebody to adjust.
So before we get into our last two segments, we thought this would be a great, question for you specifically. You've obviously worked with coaches around the world, in Europe and the United States, and the skill development is just so different overseas compared to the US. What should we do as US coaches to develop our players similar to how they develop players overseas? Because there is a marked difference in the skill development.
Well, I think one of the ways, which as you know, in Europe and internationally, it's based more on the club system, and so the club kind of has the power to, in addition to, you have to be licensed within the country or licensed by FIBA to coach, but within the club system, the club has a certain style of play. And I'll give you an example. We were working with a state in Australia, and they listed the specific skills that they wanted taught to their players, both offensively and defensively. And so I think that, if you as a coach are coming in and you kind of have this, okay, these are sort of the foundational skills that we want to teach our players, and it's almost a progression, like, okay, from age 6 to 9, they should have a mastery of this. From 9 to 13, they should have a mastery of this. Once they get to high school, and then if they're going to be at more of an advanced level, of course, like in Australia, the more advanced players, they go to the Australia Institute for Sport. So they're getting constant, work, almost like a preps, the better kids going to an Oak Hill or Montverde, here in the US. So I think having a specific set of skills for each level that, that you're able to kind of build on, almost like a foundation, I think that's the starting place. I think the second one is, we hear this debate all the time, is, not teaching zone at the youth level, at least, not until, at least, JV high school level that you play zone, but players start learning how to play, basic man-to-man principles, not using ball screens, which I love ball screens, but it makes no sense at the youth level. They should understand spacing and cutting and movement and passing and things like that. So eliminate ball screens until I think maybe 14, 15 years old. I think in Serbia, it's like they can't start running ball screens until they're 16. But, focus on process more than outcome, especially at the youth level, because at some point, obviously, it becomes more outcome based, especially if that player has a desire to, possibly play at the college level. But for right now, hey, let's, especially at the young level, let's really just give them a love for the game. Let's help them have fun. And now they want to come back, and learn more. We create more a desire to learn and to get better versus, okay, they're not able to, they're not able to acquire that skill level now. They're struggling to shoot the ball. That doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be something that continues for down the road, because we all know that current performance is not permanent.
All right, so we want to kind of move into our last two segments here. We've put together a 30-second timeout right after the timeout podcast here, and it's your platform to talk about anything you want. Something, what you have got going at Coach's Clinic, an organization you're passionate about, a charity, maybe just a unique story, a topic you want to talk about, and it's a very loose 30 seconds. So, kind of your platform to go and talk about anything you want here.
I would say the biggest thing, and this may be hard to believe, especially with me, the guy who's produced 20 DVDs, but I think that often we don't focus enough on soft skills as coaches. We don't focus on the skills of delegating, of communicating, of being able to kind of deal with conflict within your staff, things of that nature. It's needed, it's required. It's just not something that people necessarily want to purchase or do a deep dive of, unless unless they found themselves in a situation where they need it and they realize that in order to move ahead. So what I would encourage coaches is to really balance your learning, not just with all the X's and O's. It's great, Coach Don Meyer always talked about to get all the X's and O's, but you can't use all of them. Get this knowledge, but also understand, how do you manage up? Like, how do you work with your athletic director or with your school president or your school principal? How do you build relationships with your parents? How do you handle, or how do you not handle? I think handle's not necessarily the right wording, but how do you work with maybe players that have, challenges? Like, for example, there was a player that we once had that had oppositional defiance disorder. And so, working with that player was a challenge at times because, they saw everything as conflict, especially from our head coach. So, all those things, kind of think ahead on and how you would deal with that. I think the other thing that to also remember is that, life is challenging. Life is difficult, not just, for yourself, but for players. I've been in two coaching situations where we've had players pass away, like die either during the season or before the season, and how it has not only effect on you, but also their friends and their teammates and the whole school itself. And so, being able to help your players deal with that was something I wasn't prepared for. There's no coaching clinic that tells you how to handle those situations. So just having a network of people that you can go to, and having a psychological safety place where you can go as a coach and talk to someone when you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling you're trying everything but it's not working, and know, again, at the end of the day, that your self-esteem, your self-worth is not based on your X's and O's or your win-loss record or the number of championships that you have. It's not worth that. You're going to be remembered for who you are. Your family's going to remember you for the moments that you spend with them, and not the number of players you've put in college. It's not or the number of players that in the NBA. That's nice, that's great, but at the end of the day, it's not what you're truly going to be remembered for.
I just, before we move on to the next segment, everything you said was phenomenal. I think we could, Todd and I could do multiple episodes on just those topics. I think the mental health aspect of it is so important. So that was one of my favorite 30-second timeout segments. I know we could talk about X's and O's all day, but that was phenomenal. So thanks, Coach, for that. So the last thing is we do a segment called Quick Hitters. Sometimes these are basketball related, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're just, having fun, quick hitters. So these are just, spontaneous answers. So the first one for you is your favorite overseas team to watch.
It's either Barcelona or CSKA, and I've got a CSKA shirt on right now. So it's either Barcelona or CSKA.
One simple thing, maybe a little bit underrated, or something simple that you can do to improve your offense.
Passing, being able to pass the ball, hitting players on time, on target, getting the ball, passing with the seams. To me, that right there helps with shooting and helps with having a more efficient offense. Is being able to make a good pass.
All right, we got the most unique system that you've ever seen or studied.
Most unique system. New Zealand national team ran a flex flare set, and it wasn't low, it was high. It was right. It was at the free throw line and above, and it was really unique. And I had been searching for video for it. I think I found some from back in it was around 2006, 2007 when I saw it, and then last year during our clinic, one of our coaches from Argentina, he showed it as well. But it was really unique. I really like it. And it was a continuity. So I'm like, this is different. If I'm a flex coach, I might throw this in as a little counter, or just, maybe as an ATO.
Your favorite coach, obviously you've done these clinics and talked to so many people all the time, not only now, but that kind of maybe is under the radar that no one knows about.
I would say that has to be Brent Tipton. He's a coach in Guam with the Guam national team. He has done a tremendous job on the two-sided break. He did one on creating advantages with middle pick and roll. I know he's got one coming up for us on canceling dominoes on defensively. And we kind of joked that the clinic was almost like Star Search, where there were these we know there's so many good coaches out there that just don't have the platform or don't get to speak because you get the bigger name, which I understand. But yeah, Brent came recommended to us from another coach, and again through relationships, and just he's done a fabulous job. I just think he's gonna he's an up and comer that should keep an eye on, and definitely watch his clinics, because he just does a phenomenal job teaching.
All right, Brett Tipton. Now I wrote him down. Something that you think all coaches should read.
I would say the book Legacy by James Carr. It is the one book that I would have as almost like a central reading, because that book, I think, encapsulated so many different ideas that I've taken from the business world and from coaching, and it's all in one. And it's the story of the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team and their culture, but it brought so many things together. Like I think it even mentions John Boyd, the Air Force colonel who developed this system of decision making called the ODA loop, and I think he even mentions that in the book. So there's so many things that it really kind of confirmed things that I was already thinking, but it also gave me new things to think about as well. So I know that book has been recommended before. We actually had Mr. Carr speak last year at the clinic, but that would be one book I would have for required reading if I was teaching a coaching class.
Okay, so in your travels and your coaching, most underrated place to find good food.
Most underrated place to find good food. Oh man, that is a tough one.
Or maybe just a place that stood out. You went there and you're like, oh man,
So if you can't tell, I love barbecue. So I would say Memphis would be the one place for me. It's like barbecue, rib heaven for me, because you've got Rendezvous there, and you've got Central Barbecue. I don't know if many people know this or not, but I'm trying to put together a competition barbecue team for coaches. I think Coach Boone, should be kind of the leader, because he's always posting stuff. And so we came up with a team name called Blind Pig. Blind Pig Action was going to be the name of our barbecue team. But yeah, I would say Memphis. I mean, but then there's also Dreamland in Alabama that I think is really good. And then in Texas, I had a chance to try Franklin, the brisket there in Austin. So yeah, I'd say those three. But again, I'm showing my bias for barbecue.
And now I'm hungry. All right, last one. So the National Federation of High Schools this week approved the shot clock. So the big question we ask many guests, and this is always controversial, for you, yes or no, high school basketball shot clock?
Absolutely. We've needed it for a long time. And I think it's going to help us in so many different ways. Because, I know one of the biggest challenges that when I've talked to college coaches is, players making that transition from a non-shot clock environment to a shot clock environment. That curve can be a little steep. So now hopefully we shorten that curve. I know some coaches are not going to want it because, especially when they feel like they're outmatched, they're just going to hold it and try to just take the air out completely. But I just think we're doing our players a disservice by not, helping them from day one understand the dynamics and the flow and the rhythm of the game, and teaching them one thing, and all of a sudden now, once they get to a next level where it's already advance, it's already a lot more difficult because, the players are quicker and bigger, that we're not giving them, they're not coming in with some confidence versus now I'm having to learn a whole new way.
Well, Coach, we really appreciate it. I mean, it was awesome stuff that we got from you today. So especially like John said, the 30-second timeout. That's kind of the stuff when we went into this we wanted to get from our guests, different than X's and O's, and you gave us a lot of great insight into not only basketball but just the other parts of life, right? So we really appreciate it. It was so fun to have you on, and obviously we will look forward to seeing what you have coming up with the coaches clinics and everything you're doing with that, which is so amazing, and we've all been so appreciative, especially over this COVID period. So thank you very much, Coach.
Oh, guys, thank you. No, this has been an honor. I'm so glad to be a part of this. I love the fact that there's so many coaches out there that are connecting with each other and we're sharing. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, again, it's not what we know, it's what our players know and how we can get better to help them. But no, I appreciate it. This was fun. And if I could support y'all in any way with promoting the podcast and helping you with, reach more coaches, please let me know.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, hosted by Todd Zazadil and Jon Palicki. For more show content and upcoming episodes, follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout, or subscribe to our podcast for upcoming episodes. For show inquiries, you can email us at afterthetimeout@gmail.com. You can find all of our previous episodes on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast by searching After the Timeout. We appreciate you listening. Tune in next time for more basketball content on the court, off the court, and anything in between.